Rain hammered the wooden platform like nails into a coffin, each drop splintering against the warped boards and soaking through the thin fabric of her dress. The sky hung low, a bruised gray that swallowed the distant hills, turning the frontier town into a mud-choked blur. She stood there, wrists bound loosely with frayed rope that chafed her skin raw, water streaming down her face in rivulets that tasted of salt and dirt. Her hair clung to her neck like wet weeds, and the chill seeped into her bones, making her shiver in waves she couldn't control. The auctioneer's voice droned on, a gravelly bark lost in the downpour. But no one stirred in the sparse crowd huddled under leaky awnings and oilskins. Their eyes flicked over her curious, indifferent, then away as if she were just another sodden beast for sale, worth less than the mule tethered nearby. Her name was Elisa, though no one had spoken it in days, not since the wagon train left her behind, the foreman declaring her a burden after the fever took her husband and left her weak, hollowed out. She'd begged, her voice cracking like dry earth, but they'd ridden on wheels, churning mud into ruts that filled with rain. Now, here in this forsaken outpost on the edge of the Wyoming territory, she was lot number 3, a widow, 28 years old. Good for cooking or mending if the buyer ignored the hollows under her eyes and the way her hands trembled from hunger. The platform creaked under her weight, and she shifted, feeling the water pool around her bare feet, numb and prickling. A gust of wind slapped her sideways, carrying the scent of wet horsehide and distant thunder. Inside, something twisted a quiet rage, not loud enough to scream, but sharp like a thorn in her palm. The auctioneer raised his gavel, his mustache dripping, voice rising in false enthusiasm. Come on, folks, strong back, quiet tongue. Start the bid at $5. Silence answered, broken only by the patter of rain on tin roofs and the low murmur of men shifting in their boots. A few laughed, low and mean, their breath fogging the air. Eliza's gaze dropped to the mud below, where puddles reflected her blurred form like a ghost. She thought of the homestead back east, the one they'd left behind, fields of corn waving under a kinder sun, her husband's hand warm on her shoulder. But that was gone, swallowed by debt and dreams of gold that turned to dust. Her chest tightened, breath coming shallow, as if the rain were drowning her from the inside. No bids came. The crowd thinned, men turning away to seek shelter in the saloon across the street, where lantern light flickered like false promises. The auctioneer grumbled, wiping his face with a sodden sleeve, and waved a hand at her dismissively. Next lot, then. This one's a washout. Laughter rippled again, and Eliza felt it like a slap, her knees threatening to buckle. She was nothing. Now not wife, not traveler, just a shadow in the storm, abandoned once more. The rope bit deeper as she tugged against it, pointless, her mind fogging with the cold. Buzzards would find her soon enough, or wolves, if the town marshal didn't drag her to the edge of the settlement first. Then, a figure detached from the gloom at the buck, a man in a weathered duster, hat pulled low against the rain, his boots caked with the same mud that clung to everything here. He stepped forward slowly, each stride deliberate, water sluicing off his shoulders. The crowd paused, murmurs rising like steam. He was tall, lean from hard miles, face shadowed by stubble and the brim of his hat, but his eyes sharp gray, as the sky fixed on her with something she couldn't name. Not pity, not lust. Something quieter, like recognition in a mirror. He reached into his pocket, fingers fumbling, and pulled out a single coin. Tarnished and worn. His last. She sensed it in the way he held it, thumb rubbing the edge as if parting with a piece of himself. The auctioneer squinted. $1. That's your bid, stranger. The man nodded, voice low and rough, carrying over the rain like smoke. All I got. He tossed it onto the platform, where it landed with a dull clink, rolling to a stop at her feet. The crowd stirred, whispers turning to chuckles, but he didn't flinch, just stood there, rain beating on his coat, waiting. Eliza lifted her head, meeting his gaze through the curtain of water. Her heart stuttered a flicker of warmth in the cold, uncertain and fragile. The auctioneer shrugged, banged the gavel. Sold then to the fool with the coin. He untied her wrists, rough hands shoving her forward. She stumbled down the steps, mud sucking at her ankles, and the cowboy caught her arm, gentle, steady. His touch was calloused, warm against her chilled skin, and for a moment, the rain seemed to lessen. Though it pounded on, he said nothing, just led her toward a horse tied under an overhang, its coat steaming in the damp air. They rode out of town as the storm eased into a drizzle, the landscape unfolding in sodden, graze-rolling plains, scarred by gullies, sagebrush bent low. Eliza clung to the saddle behind him, her body aching, mind a whirl of questions she didn't voice. The horse's rhythm lulled her, each hoofbeat a pulse against the silence. She thought of the coin, glinting in the mud, and wondered what desperation drove a man to spend his last on a stranger. As dusk fell, they stopped by a shallow creek, the water murmuring over stones like forgotten prayers. He built a fire with damp wood, sparks hissing defiance, and handed her a blanket stiff with use. She wrapped it around herself, the wool scratching her skin, but it held the faint scent of leather and smoke comforting in its way. He sat across the flames, poking at them with a stick, his face illuminated in flickers that hid more than they revealed. "Why?" she whispered finally, voice raw. He glanced up, eyes reflecting the fire. Seen enough left behind, figured one less wouldn't hurt. It wasn't the whole truth, she felt it in the tightness of his jaw, the way his fingers clenched the stick. But for now, it was enough. The night deepened, stars piercing the clouds like pinpricks of light in a vast dark, and Eliza let exhaustion pull her under. The fire's warmth a fragile barrier against the cold world beyond. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the night like stars falling backward. Eliza huddled closer to it, the blanket drawing tight around her shoulders, but the warmth couldn't reach the ache deep in her chest. The cowboy Jack, he'd muttered earlier, as if the name were an afterthought, sat motionless, his gaze lost in the flames. The creek gurgled nearby, a steady whisper that filled the silence between them. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she ignored it, focusing instead on the way the smoke curled upward, vanishing into the black sky. It reminded her of prayers unanswered, drifting away without a trace. Memories came unbidden, sharp as a knife's edge. She saw her husband, Thomas, in the dim light of their Iowa cabin, his hands rough from plowing, cupping her face on their wedding night. "We'll make it west," he'd promised, voice steady like the river they'd crossed. But the fever had come, swift on the trail, turning his skin hot and slick, his breath's ragged gasps in the wagon's stifling heat. She'd held him through the nights, wiping sweat with her hem, whispering stories of the land ahead, green valleys, endless skies. When he slipped away, the others buried him quick, a shallow grave marked by stones, and moved on. "Can't linger," the foreman had said, eyes averted. "Fever spreads." They'd left her with a satchel of his things, a worn Bible, a locket with her hair, and the weight of his absence like a stone in her throat. She shifted on the hard ground, pebbles digging into her hips, and glanced at Jack. His profile was etched in firelight, jaw set firm, a scar tracing his cheek like a riverbed gone dry. He hadn't spoken since her question, just tended the fire with economical movements, his hands scarred and steady. The horse nickered softly from where it was tethered, grazing on sparse grass wet with dew. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, a far cry from the dust-choked plains they'd left behind. Elisa wondered about his coin. Why toss it away on her? Men like him roamed these territories, chasing cattle or ghosts, but his eyes held something haunted, a shadow that mirrored her own. As the fire dwindled to coals, she let her mind wander back further, to the day they sold the farm. Creditors at the door, their boots scuffing the porch, Thomas signing papers with a hand that shook. "Gold in California," he'd said, eyes bright with hope. But the trail had broken them, rivers swollen with melt, wheels splintered on rocks, nights where the wind howled like banshees. She'd lost a child along the way, a quiet slipping in the dark, blood staining the wagon floor. No one spoke of it after, just kept moving, the horizon a cruel tease. Abandonment wasn't new to her. The wagon train's departure was just the latest cut. Her own parents had left her at 12, fever claiming them to aunts and uncles, scattering like leaves. Survival meant hardening. But here, by this fire, the cracks showed. Jack stirred, adding a branch that popped and flared. "Sleep," he said, voice gravelly, not unkind. "Long ride tomorrow." She nodded, lying back on the blanket, the ground unyielding beneath her. Stars wheeled overhead, in different points of light, and she closed her eyes, but sleep brought dreams. Thomas laughing in a sunlit field, then fading into mist. She woke before dawn, breath fogging the air, to find Jack already saddling the horse. He handed her jerky tough, salted and a canteen, his fingers brushing hers briefly, warm against the chill. They rode north, the landscape shifting from sodden plains to rugged foothills, sagebrush giving way to scrub oak twisted by wind. The horse's gait jarred her bones, but she held on, arms around Jack's waist, feeling the rhythm of his breath. He smelled of leather and sweat, a grounding scent amid the vastness. By midday the sun broke through, drying her dress stiff with mud, steam rising from the earth like ghosts. They stopped at a spring, water clear and cold, bubbling from rocks, and she knelt to drink, cupping it in her palms, the coolness shocking her parched throat. "Why north?" she asked, wiping her mouth, voice steadier now. He squatted nearby, filling his canteen. "Got a spread up near the bighorns, small, but mine. Cattle need tending." She watched him, the way his eyes scanned the horizon, always alert. "And me, what am I to you?" He paused, water dripping from the canteen. "Help if you want, or go your way, ain't holding you." But his tone carried a loneliness she recognized, a quiet plea wrapped in grit. Her own past tugged at her abandon, piling like snowdrifts, but here was a thread, thin as spider silk, offering connection. She thought of the auction platform, rain blurring the faces, and the coin's dull gleam. Redemption wasn't grand. It was this, a shared canteen, a fire in the dark. As they mounted again, the wind picked up, carrying the faint low of distant cattle. Eliza leaned into him, the horse climbing a rise, and for the first time in months, the weight in her chest eased, just a fraction, like a door cracking open to light. The days blurred into a rhythm of hoofbeats and horizon, the land rising around them like ancient bones unearthed. Jack's ranch nestled in a valley flanked by the bighorns, peaks jagged against the sky, snow-capped even in summer's grasp. The cabin was rough-hewn logs, weathered to silver, a corral fencing and a dozen head of cattle that lowed softly at their approach. Smoke twisted from the chimney, thin and wavering, as if the place had been holding its breath. Eliza dismounted, legs unsteady on the packed earth. The air thick with the scent of pine resin and manure grounded, real in a way the trail never was. Dottie showed her inside without flourish. A single room with a stone hearth, a bunk draped in faded quilts, a table scarred from years of knives and solitude. Dust motes danced in the slanting light through the window, and she traced a finger along the sill, feeling the grit of neglected days. "Ain't much," Jack said, hanging his hat on a peg, his voice echoing slightly in the emptiness. She nodded, words caught in her throat, and set to work unbidden sweeping the floor with a broom of bound twigs, the motion pulling at her sore muscles but offering a quiet purpose. Evenings fell heavy, the sun dipping behind the mountains in a blaze of orange that bled into purple. They ate simple beans simmered with salt pork, biscuits baked hard in the Dutch oven sitting across from each other at the table, forks scraping tin plates. Jack spoke little, his stories parceled out like rations, a boyhood in Kansas, flatlands stretching endless. Then the war that scarred him deeper than the mark on his cheek. "Rebs took my brother at Shiloh," he said one night, firelight carving shadows on his face. "Came west after, figured open sky might heal what bullets couldn't." His eyes met hers then, holding a vulnerability that made her look away. Stirring embers she'd thought cooled, but tension coiled beneath the surface, a snake in the grass. Eliza woke nights to the wind rattling the shutters, her dreams laced with abandonment. Thomas's grave crumbling under rain, the wagon train's dust cloud fading. She'd rise before dawn, milking the cow in the chill air. Her hands chafed red, but the routine chafed too. Was this salvation or just another cage? Jack watched her sometimes, from the corral where he mended fences, his gaze lingering like a question unasked. Once, as she hung laundry on the line, shirts flapping like surrender flags, he approached, boots crunching gravel. "You settling?" he asked, voice lowered. She pinned a sheet, the fabric snapping in the breeze. "Trying, but ghosts don't settle easy." He nodded, thumbing his belt. "Mine either." The shift came gradual, in small gestures that bridged the gap. He taught her to ride proper, not just cling-saddle her own horse, feel the animal's rhythm under her. They herded cattle one afternoon, dust rising in clouds as they pushed strays back to the valley, her shouts mingling with his, a harmony, born of necessity. Sweat soaked her blouse, and when they paused by a stream, horses drinking deep, he passed her the canteen first, their fingers brushing again. This time, she didn't pull away, letting the warmth linger, a spark in the dry tinder of her heart, yet doubt gnawed. News trickled in from riders passing through Gold Strike South. Towns booming, but she stayed, drawn by the quiet strength in Jack's routine. One evening, as thunder rumbled distant, they sat on the porch, rain pattering the roof like old memories. He whittled a piece of wood, knife flashing, shaping it into a bird with wings half spread. "For you," he said, handing it over, rough edges smoothed by care. She turned it in her palm, feeling the grain. "Why me?" "That coin your last." He leaned back, chair creaking. "Lost my wife to cholera 2 years back. Buried her up the hill. Saw you there, in the rain, ... Reminded me of her. Alone, but fighting." His voice cracked, just once, and he cleared his throat. Didn't want to walk away again. The admission hung between them, heavy as the storm clouds. Eliza's chest tightened, echoes of her own losses rising. Thomas's fevered whispers, the child's silent departure. She set the carving down, hand trembling. Vulnerability terrified her. Hope felt like a trap, baited with warmth only to snap shut. But in his eyes, she saw not pity, but a shared fracture, mending slow as the rain strengthened, drumming the earth. She reached across, touching his arm-called skin under her fingers, a tentative bridge. The tension eased, not gone, but softened, like the land after a downpour, ready for new growth. Asterisk, autumn crept in like a thief, turning the asp gold against the granite flanks of the bighorns. Frost rhymed the grass mornings, crunching under Eliza's boots as she gathered eggs from the coop, the hens clucking complaints in the chill air. The ranch hummed with quiet industry, Jack mending tack in the barn, the scent of hay and oil hanging thick, cattle grazing the lower pasture, their breaths puffing white in the crisp dawn. She'd taken to the work, her hands toughening, calluses forming where blisters once wept. But inside, a storm brewed, unspoken words gathering like clouds over the peaks. One afternoon, as she chopped wood by the shadaks biting deep into pine logs, splinters flying like accusations. A rider appeared on the ridge, dust trailing, his horse like a shadow. He was young, face smooth under a wide-brimmed hat, carrying news from town, a stagecoach line opening south, jobs for women in the booming settlement, seamstresses, cooks, even teachers if you could read. "Plenty of opportunity," he said, tipping his hat as Jack handed him coffee by the fire. "Trail's clear now, before winter locks it." Eliza listened from the doorway, arms crossed against the wind that tugged at her skirt. The rider's words stirred something dormant, pulled toward independence, away from this fragile haven. She'd rebuilt herself here, piece by splintered piece, but reliance on Jack felt like chains, however loose. That night, as venison stew bubbled on the stove, steam curling aromatic with sage, she sat silent, fork pushing food around her plate. Jack watched her, fire popping in the hearth, shadows dancing on the walls like restless spirits. "You're thinking on it," he said finally, voice even but his knuckles white around his mug. She met his gaze, eyes the color of storm clouds. "Maybe, can't lean forever." He nodded slow, setting the mug down with a thud. "Ain't asking you to, but winter's coming, pass'll close." The words hung heavy, a crossroads etched in the lines of his face. Eliza rose, clearing plates with sharp movements, the clatter echoing her turmoil. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves, carrying the distant howl of coyotes hungry. Alone, she thought of the auction rain, her wrists raw, and the coins, gleam of Thomas's grave, unmarked now under prairie grass. Of the child lost, a ache that never named itself. Vulnerability whispered dangers, open your heart, and it shatters again. But resistance meant solitude, a life armored but empty, like the hollowed logs she split. Days blurred, tension threading through their routines. Jack grew quieter, his touches brushing past in the barn, handing tools lingering longer, a silent plea. One evening, as snow flurried light, dusting the ground like forgotten ash, they rode out to check fences, horses snorting plumes in the cold, the sky lowered, gray and oppressive, mirroring her indecision. A steer had broken through wire, wandering into a gulch, and they dismounted to herd it back, boots sinking in mud, churned soft. "Stubborn one," Jack muttered, rope uncoiling in his hands. Eliza flanked it, clapping to turn its head, but the beast bolted, kicking up clods. She slipped, ankle twisting sharp in a rut, pain lancing hot. Jack was there, quick arm around her waist, steadying. "Easy," he said, breath warm on her cheek. She leaned into him. Just for a moment, the contact igniting sparks she'd banked, but fear surged, and she pulled away, limping back to her horse. "I can manage." His eyes darkened, hurt, flickering like the dying light. "Don't have two alone." Back at the cabin, he bound her ankle with strips of cloth, fingers gentle on her skin, fire warming the room with a golden glow. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of logs. Eliza stared at the flames, heart pounding a crossroads. Rhythm, resist, and ride south with the next thaw. Coin from mending work, buying passage to a life solitary but safe. Or risk, let hope root in this soil, vulnerable as spring shoots. "I could go," she whispered, testing the words. Jack paused, clothed tight in his grip. "Could, but stain ain't weakness." She looked at him then, really looked, the scar's faint line, eyes holding storms weathered, a man who'd lost and kept going. Her own fractures mirrored there, not mended, but shared. The wind rattled the window, snow whispering against glass, and something shifted inside her, a thawing. "I want to try," she said, voice barely above the fire's murmur. "Risk it." He exhaled, a breath held too long, and took her hand, thumb tracing her palm, calloused now, like his. No grand promises, just the quiet press of skin. A choice made in the flickering light. As night deepened, snow blanketing the world in hush, Eliza felt the weight lift, not gone, but light, a hope, a fragile flame, but burning. Asterisk, winter locked, the valley in ice, the bighorn standing sentinel under a blanket of snow that muffled the world to whispers. Eliza rose with a pale dawn, breath clouding as she stoked the fire, embers glowing like buried secrets. The cabin had become a cocoon, walls creaking with frost, but holding warmth in the scent of coffee boiling and bread rising in the pan. Jack moved through the days with her now, a shared cadence, feeding the stock in the barn, steam rising from their hides, repairing the roof where snow weighted it low, evenings by the hearth, mending gear or reading from the worn Bible. Thomas, what had left behind. Acceptance came not in a rush, but in the slow melt of spring thaw. She found herself lingering in touches, a hand on his shoulder as he carved notches in a post, his fingers grazing hers when passing the lantern. The rebirth was quiet, rooted in the earth they tended. One morning, as icicles dripped from the eaves like tears finally shed, Eliza walked the hill behind the cabin, snow crunching under her boots, to the grave Jack had mentioned, a simple cross, weathered pine, marked where his wife lay, the ground still hard but softening. She knelt, fingers tracing the wood, feeling the echo of loss, not just his, but hers, intertwined now like roots beneath the soil. "Mr. Green," Jack said later, as they sat on the porch, sun slanting low, turning the snow to diamonds. He meant the valleys back east, but she heard the deeper longing for lives unlived, paths not taken. She nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter, the air carrying the faint thaw scent of mud and renewal. "We make our own," she replied, voice steady, and he smiled then, a rare curve that softened the scar on his cheek. The cattle calved in the warming days, slick newborns staggering on spindly legs, their mothers lowing soft encouragement. Eliza, when it helped midwife one stubborn birth, sleeves rolled, hands slick with afterbirth, Jack at her side guiding the pull. The calf emerged, gasping, life insistent, and as it nursed, she felt a stirring rebirth, not just in the beast, but in herself. Wounds didn't vanish, they scarred over, toughening the skin. Abandonment's sting faded, replaced by this partnership forged in quiet acts, like splitting wood together, axes rising and falling in rhythm, or sharing silence under stars pricking the velvet sky. Understanding deepened one night, storm winds howling like old ghosts. Lightning cracked the dark, illuminating the room in flashes, and Eliza woke to Jack's restless turning. She reached out, palm on his back, feeling the tension coiled there. "The war?" she asked, thunder rumbling distant. He turned, face half-shadowed, and after left too many behind. His voice carried the weight of battlefields, brothers buried in mud. Then the westward drift solitude a shield until it became a prison. She shared her own fractures, the farm sold, Thomas's fevered end, the wagon's retreat, words spilled like rain long held, washing clean. In the quiet after, as the storm eased a patter on the roof, they lay close, breaths sinking, bodies finding solace in shared warmth. Not passion's fire, but a steady glow. Acceptance of flaws and fears. Summer bloomed fierce, wildflowers carpeting the valley in purples and golds, bees droning lazy. They rode the range, checking fences mended strong, cattle fattening on lush grass. Eliza's hands, once trembling now gripped, reins firm, her laugh carrying on the breeze when Jack teased about her eastern ways. Redemption wasn't in grand gestures, but in this daily weaving threads of past and present knotting into something durable. As autumn circled back, leaves rustling crimson, a trader passed through bartering goods for hides. He spoke of the world beyond, railroads snaking west, towns swelling. Eliza listened, but the pull southward had weakened, roots sunk deep here. That evening, by the creek where they'd first camped, water murmuring over stones, she turned to Jack. "I'm staying," she said, not a question, but a truth settled. He nodded, hand finding hers, fingers interlacing rough and sure. "Good." The sun dipped, painting the sky in hues of fire, smoke rising from the cabin chimney like a signal of home. Eliza thought back to the rain-soaked platform, wrists bound, the world's indifference, a downpour. Now, in this quiet, she felt the transformation, resilience, not in isolation, but in connection, abandonment, yielding to belonging. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the scent of earth and promise, and in the fading light, the coins. Memory gleamed not as loss, but as the start of mercy found.